You're listening to Distraction Therapy with Rob Watson. Conversations about how we find meaning in our lives and what it's like to be part of a metamodern world. Hello, it's Rob Watson here, and this is Distraction Therapy, and I'm joined again by Ryan Clayton.
Hello.
How's things? What have you been up to?
Very good. Busy at work, reading a lot. I started Charlie Kaufman's novel. Fantastic. Not much other than that.
If you can just raise the mic a touch.
Like that?
Yeah, that's
that better?
Cool. That's better. Yeah, that works out perfect.
Fantastic.
We were talking last time, and unfortunately we were abruptly cut off with our microphone. We're in a coffee shop today. We're having to sit down, so there's lots of noise in the background.
Bless him. Rob's gotten too old to walk around all the time.
Well, it's cold outside. You were just moaning that it was cold outside, and it's gone miserable. So
any excuse to throw you under the bus, though.
And we've just had these massive storms this week, so it's you take refuge wherever you can. But we were talking last time about this idea of the new sincerity and what it means to be to move past the postmodern ironisation and pastiche of communication and culture. And one of the clips that I did in the last podcast, somebody was talking about they grew up with the kind of 90s culture of, I suppose, shoegaze and indie, depressive, kind of woe is me. To this day I can't listen to Radiohead because they just feel miserable to me. I was never into Nirvana or the Pixies or anybody like that because it was just too. For me, it was just too miserable. But the alternative was very ironic, I suppose. So you end up with bands like Talking Heads, which are about an ironic sensibility, or Pet Shop Boys, and kind of lots of dance music is kind of about the surface rather than anything sustained in terms of a dialogue with the listener, if you like. So coming out of that, though, is this idea that the metamodern period is defined by a return to sincerity, and this is one thing that you talked about. So can you explain what that means to you?
Well, I suppose I think about it primarily. The lens through which I view popular culture is through film and through comic books, and the way I think about it, particularly with what's happening right now in comic books, is the new Superman comics, the new what's his name? I don't know why I'm looking at you. Is it Nightwing? Batman's former Robin. Anyway, those comics are written by a guy called Tom Taylor, who seems to be really invested in exploring the characters and what they stand for in a very, very sincere fashion. For example, like I was telling you the other day, Superman is, on the cover of one of his recent issues, which was only released, I think, last month, going on climate strikes with a bunch of students and his boyfriend who's got purple hair and just wears a hoodie all the time. And Nightwing has decided to donate his vast wealth to restoring the inner city. The main villain of those comics right now is literally called the Heartless and goes around stealing people's hearts, which I think is a fantastic metaphor, if not a bit ham-fisted. And, whenever you describe these things, and Rob's just given us the perfect example, a face is always pulled as if to say, well, that sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? Well, that sounds a bit stupid. And I think it is because of that really full-on level of sincerity, the idea that there is something hard to push past there, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. That, wearing your heart on your sleeve, really showing people what matters to you and pushing back against the things that are obviously causing harm. And maybe it is just because we've grown up in a very cynical, almost nihilistic culture. I mean, when I was growing up, although it was well before my time, I listened to Nirvana a lot. I was very big into heavy metal, Slipknot, Lamb of God, bands like Dying Fetus. It doesn't get more nihilistic than that. But then there sort of reaches a point where, I don't know, maybe it was being taken on a whistle-stop tour of the history of philosophy for 3 years for my degree, where you almost get taken through the process in fast forward, where you start off with Plato and how he's trying to build meaning, and then, you know, you zoom forward and you get people like Descartes, Kant, and then suddenly you're in the postmodernists, and you have existentialism crop up and phenomenology to combat the kind of to combat a meaning crisis. But I would love to hear from your perspective. What is it when you hear those things? What is it that makes you push back a little bit?
It's an impulse, isn't it? It's like it's like something that is kind of so deeply embedded in your being that, you know, let's think about it from a phenomenological standpoint of, you know, I come from a family that hates organised fun, doesn't like joining in. If you were, you know, typically if you were at a holiday camp and there was a knobbly knees competition, we'd all run in a different direction because we wouldn't want to be part of we don't let ourselves go into the group activity. It's just something which is part of the sensibility, but it also comes through from things like, I suppose it's like a lack of it's a limited emotional education, ability to express yourself in a way which is authentic. Authentic's not the right word, ability to a genuine expression of your emotion.
Well, that's interesting, because I was about to ask you if you thought that maybe, it just popped into my head as you were talking, do you think that pushback is maybe an issue with vulnerability? To be sincere, you kind of have to put yourself in quite a vulnerable position, because there will be people that push back, and when they push back against you being vulnerable, it's
and that's replete through our culture. You know, it's the standard mode of operating. Is that, you know, certainly Western, you know, modern, you know, contemporary society is not about, you know, we compartmentalise well-being and mental health, and we offer well-being services on the basis of, if you like, a kind of lifestyle add-on. We don't have that core. One of the things about, I think you probably correct me, I think it was Aristotle was concerned about character, and that was something that what's his name?
He was very big on virtue ethics.
Yeah, and there was a return to that when the kind of romantics were, and the guy who Schopenhauer was talking about, you know, the purpose in life is not to, you know, polish your personality. I'm using my words, polish your personality, and to artificially construct the best version of yourself. It's to discover what your character, and life is a journey of discovery of what your character is. But we live in a society now that doesn't do that anymore, and it didn't do that. So I was at a school I went to a Church of England school, which is a boys' school, so 70s, early 80s, British education, and, you know, if you're any way slightly different, there was no real capacity or structure there to support you. So I'm dyslexic, and, you know, just really bad basic kind of form of education. You know, blame and punishment, not support and advice. It wasn't nurturing in that way. It wasn't. In other ways, it was, I suppose. You know, the character forming was about standing on the rugby, the football pitch, or playing rugby, and having, being bashed to bits by 22, 23 other people in the freezing cold. That was what was viewed as being something that would develop your character. that physical attributes and masculinity and all that kind of stuff, which I kind of ran a mile from, as soon as I could. But so that kind of character development, and it was a church school, so it was very much kind of CV focused in terms of the lessons of the Gospels and all that kind of, but none of them were ever actually explained. They were just given to you as if somehow you would absorb the lessons. And most people probably just feel very comfortable in doing that, but I didn't. So you kind of end up in a kind of position where when you encounter things, moments of so for example, probably the closest that we get to communal expressions of joy is when people go to a rock concert, a music concert.
I was thinking along the lines of football, like when
so
England was in the World Cup
singing,
and they were doing well,
shouting. There's a transcendence that comes from that communal experience, and again, I just don't connect with that. I don't. And when I've tried it, I've always had a negative reaction from other people around me. So other people can go and do that, and they can be fully celebrated for that. But if I try it with my friends near me, it's like I always get a funny look. So you edit, you self-edit, and you just cut yourself off from it, I suppose. And I suppose that kind of level of sincerity becomes something that you strategically manage.
Yeah.
And that's the contemporary way of doing things. You don't go into the workplace. You don't go into the workplace and be yourself. You don't be the version of you that you're most comfortable with. You have to fit in with the strategic objectives of the other narcissists and, kind of duplicitous, I'm trying to find a polite word to say, people that you work with who form the basis of an organisation.
Yeah, I suppose there are a lot of nasty words we could use, but maybe best not to.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting then. So, thinking about it in terms of metamodernism then, because I'm starting to feel like metamodernism then, as well as being like a return to sincerity in popular culture and media, on a more personal level, might be about allowing yourself to be vulnerable, letting that guard that you hold up, that little editor, if you like, that stands at the back and tells you what to say and what not to say, just give him the day off.
It's things like I did a podcast the other day, and it was at an art design event down at Beta X in Leicester.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody who ran a creative session with some kids. It was really great. She was fantastic. And I asked her, what's your ethos for doing this? And she said, it's like a therapy. And I said, I was really pleased to use that word because that's what I like about podcasting. And I was reading an article, I was flicking through Instagram today, and I follow Alistair Campbell. He's starting a podcast with Rory Stewart, the former Conservative cabinet minister under Theresa May. And so opposite sides of the political spectrum, if you like. But one of the things Campbell says, and he's quite, he talks about this a lot, he finds doing podcasts like therapy. Yeah. And it's like, because you're having an engaged conversation with somebody. So it's that introduction of the process through which you can find some kind of transformative angle on things, some kind of meaning within it, which is actually therapeutic. And I think that's what you're putting back into the metamodern impulse, is to put that element back into art, music and literature and cultural practice, creative practice, so it not just being a playful gimmick. So it's not just something which you just show how smart you are in playing with the signifiers and shifting them about all the time and having fun with them, but it's actually something which has got something which is people can actually invest in on a human level.
Because it's more intensely personal, isn't it? It's like, now when we're sat here talking through things we know nothing about, trying to figure them out, there's an element of personal discovery that comes along with that as well. Because when we first started these podcasts, I didn't know what metamodernism was. I didn't know how I felt about it. But it feels like every time we sit down and we have a conversation, you learn a little bit. You learn something new, and where does that come from? It doesn't come from anywhere other than yourself, and sitting there and, like you say, having engaged, almost therapeutic conversation with somebody else who's also willing to engage. Which I suppose that feels like a recurring thing. That willingness to engage keeps coming back. Like you were talking about it earlier, that willingness to engage in communal joy, that willingness to engage with things that are sincere and that tap into something a little deeper about humanity.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, the kind of humility to be able to say that you don't know the answer. But what's nice, and I like listening to podcasts where people explore things and they're able to articulate things, because it comes back to, I might have said this before in terms of what is thinking. Is that William James, one of the few quotes I can remember is kind of what is thinking. Well, he works it out as a gesture, and rather than it being something which is programmed or that kind of, this is why talking about meaning is so important, because what is meaning? And meaning isn't just a function. Meaning is, because you have transcendent meanings, you have those moments of insight and inspiration that take you beyond and allow you to synthesize unconsciously things that are happening in your life, and then you can be worried and thinking about a lot of things, and then you suddenly realise, no, there's a thread here, or there's a pattern, or there's something going on where you start to see the connections with things which you didn't consciously. I suppose my sense of this is that people who know me for a long time it's just the intense sense of frustration, constantly trying to something isn't right, something isn't good, that there's something could be different, but you don't have the language or the people to explore and develop that language, because if it requires sincerity, and your interaction with it is with people who are incapable of fostering or nurturing that sincerity, because they can be quite dismissive and status oriented. So you don't want to put yourself out there on a level which is to be, genuine, a genuine expression of who you are or what you think or how you feel, because you're going to, you feel as if you're going to get shot down or dismissed or passed over.
Yeah.
So you never push it forward. It's in abeyance. And that can become a frustration, but to work through that and then to find and make those connections with other people. So this week has been quite interesting with some of the people I've spoken to for some of the other podcasts I've done, which has been about a younger, there was a couple of people in their early 20s, recent graduates, who were talking about their view. I was asking them what their view and their motivation was for kind of design practice, and what they were telling me and they were reaching for, they didn't have a clear way of articulating it, but what I took from it was that they were looking at it holistically, they were looking at it in a grounded way, they were looking at it from an emotionality of things and a spirituality of things, whatever you mean by that. But what they weren't doing was they weren't putting an ideological, they weren't putting a historical, they weren't putting a process-led, they were putting, they seemed to me that they were starting to get the horse before the cart, whereas for a lot of the time I think modernism and postmodernism put the cart before the horse, if you like.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And it's not new, it's a recurring pattern throughout certainly Western human thinking.
Yeah.
I suppose every generation comes along and kind of thinks that it's doing something new. And then when you look back, and as one of the observations is that it sounds sometimes when you talk to people, it's a bit of a return to a kind of romanticism, a neo-romanticism that puts the self, it puts the consciousness of the individual at the centre of social experience before systems and processes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that, from my studies of philosophy, it kind of occurs sporadically throughout the history of philosophy. It kind of occurs sporadically throughout philosophy, which is why I'm quite glad that when I studied philosophy, it was a very historically orientated approach. Like, we literally started with Plato and moved forward. But, Aristotle puts the individual and their experience at the heart of the ethical and how you relate to the world. He talks about, stumbling and fumbling through human experience and not doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but doing the right thing because that's what a virtuous person would do, and developing your character along the lines of a good character.
Is it Aristotle? I can't remember. Do you examine life? Is life not worth living? Is that Socrates or Aristotle?
That might be Socrates, but I'm not sure. I'm not too good on the quotes. But and then, like you say, it occurs later on, and then it comes back, full force with the existentialists, which is it's the stuff that I find the most interesting.
So I've got a question for you then, which is, what do you think to the critical theorists and deconstructionists? Because one of the things we're being asked to do at the moment is to abandon or overturn the canon. As if the canon is a monolithic, the Western canon of thinking, which has been in place for 4,000 years, is not without its critique. It's not without its need to be critiqued and revised and reviewed. And many people have demonstrated the capacity to critique and revise and review that over many hundreds of years. However, since the Enlightenment, but at the moment we seem to be in a period where the fashion is to just abandon the canon and say, because it's characterised by a load of men and European men, that we should somehow just overturn it. What does that mean when you see stuff like that? And based on your commitment to studying this canon, what's your response to that?
I have a very conflicted response about that, because I think that response, that impulse to throw out the canon. Let's take literature, for example, like the literary canon. I think it's a perfectly reasonable response to look at that historically, and for the reason, the sociological, political reasons, whatever, to just say, well, you know what, I'm frustrated that this canon has just been put forward by white intellectuals. It needs to be thrown out. I think that's a perfectly valid response. But also, there is a lot of great work in that canon as well. Like, one of the things I did over lockdown was make an effort to read some more, for want of a better word, big and important books. Books that otherwise I would look at and say, well, that sounds a bit dull. I picked up the biggest book I could find, The Count of Monte Cristo, and just thought, you know what, whatever, I'll read this. And it was one of the best things that I'd ever read. One of my favourite novels. It's just like reading an extended action revenge thriller. Really brilliant stuff. So what I think is key is not so much to throw out the canon, but to revise the relationship we have as consumers, individuals.
Because you can't make the choices of what you're going to throw out unless you understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a set of rules and practices which have come through over many thousands of years, consciously and unconsciously, individually and collectively, which to just suddenly turn around and say, and it also suggests that the canon, those people involved in developing that canon, haven't also been influenced by other practices and other models of consciousness. So the Schopenhauer was drawn by Hinduism and Buddhism. Thinking in that kind of romantic early 19th century period he was working in. There was an incorporation of Eastern models of thinking.
Well, that again, this is one of the really interesting things I find about the history of Western philosophy. It starts off with Plato, and not to put it too bluntly, he gets everything wrong and sets philosophy in the wrong direction for 2,000 years, where everybody's stumbling to try and work out the mess that he made for us. And then the longer it progresses, the canon of Western philosophy, the more it starts to resemble those kind of Eastern wisdoms that have, again, my knowledge of Eastern philosophy is fairly limited, but I don't think there's been the same kind of tumultuous progress in Eastern philosophy that there has been in Western philosophy, that's so constantly changing. And to finish the point I started, the more that Western philosophy moves on and progresses, the more it starts to look like Eastern philosophy. The more you get Schopenhauer being influenced by those things, the more you get existentialism and phenomenology looking almost identical to Buddhism.
But you get a shift in the idea of what progress itself is. So that linear sense of progress, whereas the Eastern model of progress is cyclical.
Yeah.
And incorporating a cyclical view rather than a linear view of thinking means that you have to look at how you incorporate and transcend rather than, if you like, dominate and overcome.
Yeah. Well, progress is a concept in and of itself that's worth looking at, because it was one of the things I did for my dissertation. I was talking about how do we respond authentically to being historical beings. And I looked at three figures. I looked at Hegel, I looked at Nietzsche, and I looked at Heidegger. And Hegel has that very kind of Western, straightforward view of progress, of eventually, of continuing to mature, thesis, antithesis, eventually realising our own godhood. And what I found really interesting about Nietzsche is the idea that he almost rejects the notion of progress altogether. And he says, well, the entire idea doesn't make any sense. If you look at history, if you were to take a snapshot of it at any point, it's always complete. It's not moving anywhere. It always is what it is, which I think that really hit me when I was doing my research.
In what way?
In the way that you just sort of, it's never something that's elaborated on or explained to you. Progress is always taken as a given, even in the very minute ways in which we live our lives. You do this so you can do that, so you can move on and do this. Like the school system's a great example. You grow up, you go to school, you do good in your GCSEs so you can go do your A-levels, and you do good in your A-levels so you can go to university, and you do good at university so you can get a job, so you can make a lot of money, so you can get a family, and so you can then look and care after that family so they can go to school and do good in their GCSEs. And already you're seeing the problem. That notion of linear progress that you started out with has become cyclical, has become contained in the kind of, Ouroboros eating its own tail.
But I suppose the aim is to widen the circle, widen the cycle, so that it incorporates more. So the cycle of the individual and the cycle of the family collective, then the social network collective, then the global social collective that incorporates more and more beings, if you like, as you go along. So your responsibilities. And I think that's one of the differences, if you like. Modernity was very much about you had that right to use the resources, but it didn't really come with the responsibility. And each push outwards is a circle of pushing outwards of responsibility, because you're thinking on behalf of other people. So as individuals, and we live in a time which is very much focused on the idea that you just need to think individually for yourself. And what is right for you, this is the neoliberal capitalist market model, what is right for you in aggregate of all those other individuals acting in this way is correct. That will come out with the wisdom of the market. Yeah. That will produce the Adam Smith, kind of the invisible hand, or whatever it's called. And so, but actually we've proven that is leading to our destruction with climate crisis and inequality and all these other factors that kind of impact on people. And so if you push that circle of responsibility out, if you say the purpose of life is your responsibility in that process to accept that you have a moral duty, that kind of Kantian notion, to improve yourself, improve the people that you're associated with, improve the people that you are not associated with, and improve the beings that you are also you're sharing coexistence with, then that changes your whole structure of thinking, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think it shows at the very least that notion of progress that we talk about so freely and just sort of dole out like it's nothing needs re-examining. To go back to the example earlier of the cyclical idea of progress, to use that very personal example already starts to show more cracks in it, because, I mean, how many people follow that cyclical path? How many people decide nowadays, you know what, I don't want to have kids? How many people follow different lifestyles? How many people don't go to university? How many people don't finish their A-levels, just get a job or go and do something completely different? I don't know, let's start a business.
Well, I mean, there's no fixed pattern as to what makes a meaningful life.
Well, exactly,
But we live in a world which has these expectations placed on us, but they're no longer expectations that are defined through organised religion or, if you like, work-based identity, so trade unions, working men's clubs, that kind of stuff. It's very much market-driven, it's very much consumerist, and it's about, so our schools have become little factories for strategic thinking, transactional thinking beings, and your whole motive for education is what you're employed, not what value you create to society and future generations, but what you can earn in your job and how you can pay back the enormous loans that the government's foisted on you.
I'm suddenly getting flashes of that music video from Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall.
Yeah. So and that was the question I was going to kind of move us on to. How does this then get manifest in our culture? What should we be looking out for in terms of film and music? Where's this new sincerity coming from, or what is the kind of work that we can maybe reappraise to look at and say, well, hang on a minute, there's something, this is where it's being expressed?
I feel like one of the things that I'm also very interested in is the notion of cult cinema, that kind of cinematic canon that sits alongside the traditionally great films. I'm thinking of films like none are coming to my head right now, but like El Topo or The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension.
It sounds like the stuff that what's his name?
Quentin Tarantino
rips off. Yeah.
Well, that's
that postmodern.
Yeah.
I can't watch Tarantino films because they don't seem sincere to me.
Well, because I feel like he's got the appeal of these cult movies a bit ass backwards. He looks at them, and he's still looking at them from a traditionally canonistic, detached perspective at the form, at the filmmaking techniques. What really makes these films very interesting, and why they've stood the test of time, despite being relegated to the dustbin of cinema, is that they were all made with such sincerity. They were made by people that believe in them, and people latch on to that. There's not the same kind of, there's not always the same kind of formalist brilliance of Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather movies. But, I mean, that's, I think, interesting, because I think historically The Godfather came about roughly the same time of history as El Topo, and both are ridiculously divergent films. They're so different from one another, and yet still exist.
Well, Coppola was I saw online. Coppola was reported as saying, kind of the Marvel movies, the superhero, the DC movies, kind of are just a waste of really good directors' times.
Well, you know what? I mean, he's not wrong, but I think it's also incredibly hypocritical because.
Because I think his point was that the Hollywood system forced him out of being an auteur, forced him in to consider the cash that the audiences can generate, and that's the prime. I mean, you've got to make money, but the Disneyfication, the kind of format, the Marvel movies are very. He said you just repeating and repeating and repeating the same story over and over again, and you're not making any invention. And so if that's the case, where's the invention coming from? Is it in games? Is it, they've drawn recently on comics, and it'll be interesting to go and see the Batman to see how that is drawing on the tradition of its reinvention through the comic books.
Well, this is something that fascinates me, because that the reinvention of the Batman is. Film at the moment seems obsessed with comic books and mining them. There's so many comic adaptations in film. You trip over them all the time. Have you ever seen Blue is the Warmest Colour?
No.
This really great, touching 3-hour-long drama about these two girls that fall in love. Comic book adaptation. Again, once you're put under the spotlight, you can't think of many more. But
there was an interview with Robert. I was watching it last night on YouTube. Robert Pattinson was promoting the new Batman film, and he was interviewed at Jimmy Kimmel or something. I can't remember. And he said his take on it. He said, I really liked it because the take on it. When he first had a conversation with the director and they were kind of agreeing to do it, he said he wanted it to draw on Nirvana. He wanted to model them on Kurt Cobain. And he said when they were doing the costume test to begin with, apart from trying on the Batman scenes, he said he wanted to do it in the dressing gown and fluffy slippers and the hat, the beanie hat. Yeah. And he said no, it's just a bit too far. He wanted his Bruce Wayne stylisation to be based on that. And it's just interesting that but the difference is that you can have this play with the costumes, and you move from a position of I remember once beginning to as you get a bit older, you've listened to lots of music and you've seen lots of bands, or you've seen lots of music videos and stuff, and then so I went to a music festival in Liverpool, and there was loads of really great bands on in the basements and in bars and things like that, but a lot of them, you start standing there going, yeah, that's a bit like this and this, and they've seen their dad's record collection and they've got these elements in there. And then I thought, no, don't think like that. Are they doing a good job of as if they give a damn about what they're doing? Is their posture and their stance enough? And I thought that was enough for me at the time to kind of go, yeah, it's just about your posture and your stance. Does it look like you're doing the performance properly? But then I've questioned that now to say, well, what's underneath that in terms of its sincerity? Is it enough to just play with the costumes, play with the stylisation, play with the stance? Or does there need to be something else that's underneath?
Well, there's a couple of things there that I'd like to unpack a little bit. One of them is that sincerity, the fact that they care. I remember I watched recently, again, I think it was on Instagram as I was just scrolling through the reels whilst I was doing my business, and it was with a rapper, and I can't remember his name, reasonably big, quite successful, and one of the questions that he was asked was, do you take your craft seriously? Which is, it's an interesting question to ask anybody. But his answer was, no, absolutely not. I go into the studio with my mates and we just, we mess about, we have a good time and we see what happens. And then he recites some of his lyrics. And you can see the people around him kind of start to get into it, start to enjoying it. And then he stops and he goes, well, what the hell is that?
I think that's I've never been into rap music. Whatever form it takes, I just don't get into it. Because part of it is about, it seems to me, and I'm probably very ill-informed, that it is just what you've just described. It is like a surface play. And it's like kind of, you bring these things together and it is like a posture. And I'm not saying other forms of rock music are any better than that. I'm just saying that this is why I can't get into it.
I think it is. It is and it isn't. It's like everything. It's so broad that there will be people, bands, whatever you come across that do that. But then there are some as well where that kind of linguistic playfulness, which already I think is so interesting and just is really quite inspired, becomes and touches upon something a little deeper. I'm thinking of like older, early Kanye West stuff which is like very linguistically playful and touches on quite a lot of deeper personal stuff. That's just it's very interesting. And
so what's in your record collection now then? What kind of stuff do you listen to?
I mean, that's a good question. Because I don't listen to a lot of music. A lot of the stuff I listen to over and over again. And I find myself on my way to work
obsessing about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's telling you something. I mean, that I was worried about that. I was going to bed a few weeks ago, and I was constantly... I'd been watching the Get Back movie, The Beatles, and I constantly had those songs from Let It Be, the album, in my head. I was going to bed, and I was kind of like, what's going on? And then I realised... it's trying to tell you something. There's you're being pulled into something which you've got to try and articulate and understand what it is.
Yeah.
So what's that? What you're listening to? What's the sensibility that it's about? That it's telling you. Think about this. But it's that thing again, isn't it? We kind of feel as if we need to recoil from that. We don't throw ourselves and submerge ourselves into it and say, this is how we do our thinking. That's not thinking.
Yeah.
That's an aesthetic experience. That's what you're having by having that kind of constant replay of certain songs. They're hitting a nerve. That's your psyche is telling you something, and you've got to tune into it and find out what it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I listen to almost on repeat, like the same 4 or 5 prog rock bands, like a lot of Pink Floyd, T-Rex, King Crimson, Rush, Dream Theater, just over and over again.
Have you tried Can?
Sorry, who?
Can.
I don't.
German. I'm not sure if they're prog rock, but you'd like Can. You end up getting into that kind of Frank Zappa-ish kind of stuff, which is just a bit too far for me. But there's Can and there's Hawkwind and bands like that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've never listened to any Frank Zappa, but I feel like it's the kind of thing that I would enjoy if I gave it a shot.
It's very baroque. Lots of twiddly stuff.
Yeah. But I just think that one of the songs that I keep listening to over and over again is the opening track on one of Dream Theater's early albums. I think it's Images, called Pull Me Under, which is this like 8-minute long song about death. He talks about, pull me under, like I'm watching the world like spin around me and I don't care anymore, like I've become disconnected. And it's also formally very interesting because it goes on for such a long time. You're almost lulled into this sense of thinking, almost unconsciously believing that the song isn't going to end. It keeps going and going, and all of a sudden, almost like mid-note, the song just ends. And it feels like something's been ripped away from you. And I just love that when, like, everything about the song is being pushed forward to explore this one theme, and in this case it's death and what it's like. Even the language there, like pull me under, it's quite soft. It's like he's talking about it, there's images of clouds in there, and then all of a sudden it ends and it's quite violent, it's abrupt.
There's the Beatles, She's so heavy, I think it's called.
Oh yeah.
At the end of the first side of the White of the Abbey Road album, and it's like they're really rocking out, and then they just turn it off. Lennon just says no, just cut it there, and it's I don't know, you kind of expectation about how you listen to music, why you listen to music. Again, the language of this, because one of the things I was kind of reflecting on about this is I also grew up in a period of time where music is such a strong identity for a lot of people that it was very dogmatic. Now, when I've spoke to people earlier in the week in some of the other podcasts, I was asking them who and what they're influenced by, and they wouldn't give me an answer. They would say, well, lots of stuff, all over the place, everything. And it's like, well, it can't be that. It was much more structured. You were either into one thing or you were into another. So if you were into punk, you could not be into prog rock.
Yeah.
And the famous thing about, who's the guy in the Sex Pistols who liked the Beatles?
Johnny Rotten?
No, it was the one who they booted out and replaced with Sid Vicious. What's his name?
God, nice.
And Steve Jones. And they booted him out because he liked the Beatles. And it's kind of like, no, because you weren't allowed, you had to make a choice. either you were for something or against something, and you defined it in those terms. But then there's also the other one, and I call them the kind of people who listen to BBC Six Music when it first came, blokes mainly, who know the catalogue numbers of all the albums, and it's like, oh yeah, I call them the Six Music Borosauruses. It's like they're just so boring that, oh yeah, I remember when Damon Albarn released this cassette in Japan, and it's like, and you just get into this endless minutiae, because what you're not talking about is the aesthetic appreciation, the aesthetic value. So there's no language there to talk about what it means, or how it articulates a sense of being or a sense of emotionality or whatever else that goes with it. It's just, this is good to listen to if you're under these substances. This is good to listen to if you're in a live gig space. This might be good to listen to while you're driving around. So the mixtape as you're driving around in a car, and that's what constructed the experience of music. And I think I lost interest in talking about music with people for many years, because you can't explore it with people.
Yeah, well, and that's why for me music has always been a very personal thing. I've just, it's something I'd have on and I'd listen to as I walk to work, or I'm sat there by myself, very rarely discussing with other people what it is I like or dislike, because I just never saw the value in it, which I think is a little sad in a respect, because part of the joy of music is that live experience with other people, that communal appreciation for music. I mean, whatever it is, I think that's the same across all musical genres.
And I suppose the pandemic has pushed us into a different way of thinking when live events have been basically curtailed. And you're sitting at home listening to music more, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of, and if anything comes out of a resurgence. The impact of the lockdowns on the music scene has been quite devastating. But will that go back to what was in place before, or will people start to say, there was one of the radio stations, a follow-up in Liverpool, Melodic Distraction, and I was up there a few months ago talking to Josh, who runs it, and he described one of the events he was just telling me typically the events they do. Said Sunday mornings they get beanbags out and somebody does an ambient mix.
Excellent.
And they come and listen to soundtracks and soundscapes, and it's like, that's kind of what we need the spaces for now. So it's not just four blokes, four people up on the stage thrashing away with guitars, and a load of people stood in the crowd with cans of beer, bobbing up and down or wherever. That's not just the only way that we can experience music. And maybe part of the metamodern turn sparked a thought now, isn't necessarily about the object, the aesthetic object itself. It's the way that we approach the experience and enter into a relationship with that aesthetic object. So it's about changing the context in which we look at aesthetic creative practices. So if we come to it from a music sense, we're not just the audience anymore. We're co-creators, we're co-participants in something else, something that goes beyond that performer-audience relationship, maybe.
I don't know what to say to that, actually.
Well, I don't know. It's just
quite interesting.
Maybe that's what we kind of look out for. I mean, and it's just as kind of as we travel around and just keep a check on things and make a note of things and kind of say, why is this different from what people were doing before? And it's easier to do it when you can mark the generational shift. Yeah. So it's easier to see it when you can say, would a group of 50-year-olds go to this event? No, because they're used to going to these kind of events. Would a group of 20-year-olds go to this event? Well, maybe, because they don't have the precepts and they don't have the heritage of going to certain kinds of gigs, if you like. They want to define something else for themselves.
Well, then that's interesting then, because the generation that is currently growing up in a world that let's say they've not known or had very limited knowledge of a pre-coronavirus England, America, whatever. What will their relationship with music be like?
The internet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people said to me. What's the abiding thing that defines your generation. Most of them said the internet. We get all of our social experience through the internet.
Yeah.
And it's not all of it, but that's commonly what is the thread that joins things up.
Well, it's weird. It's weird for me in particular, maybe because of the kind of music I listen to. These kind of prog rock albums with maybe like 5 20-minute songs on them that are designed to be listened to as an album because the album follows through on a particular concept. I'm thinking specifically of the thing that comes to me is Coheed and Cambria. I don't know if you've ever heard of Coheed and Cambria, but a lot of their albums follow through, basically tell this grand, epic space opera, and their first 4 albums in particular follow through one long story. And one of the things that they did, which I thought was almost this brilliant experiment, is they took time out to 4 nights in a row. They would put on this concert, and each night they would play one of the albums live through in its entirety. So if you bought, your 4 tickets to go and see those 4 shows, you could experience that album and that story in its entirety. And so that's always been, because they've been my favourite band since I was like 14. So I never really took to Spotify in any kind of meaningful way, because it's more like, I like this song from here and this song from here, and creating your own playlists and mixing them up. I've always just sort of bought an album and listened to that album from track 1 to track whatever.
Well, I think maybe that's one way of identifying the difference. Not the only way, but one way. It's like kind of the difference between the generation who's grown up with a playlist and the generation who grew up with a record shop.
Yeah.
And I know there's a it's like vinyl is like people's interest in classic cars. There's always an interest in retro stuff, whether it's vintage clothes, vintage homeware, vintage music, vintage whatever. There's always this interest in it. It has a certain cachet to it.
I feel like it's that same kind of appeal as when you're a kid and you're interested with dinosaurs. It's like something that doesn't exist anymore, but at one point was like this huge thing that was, all over the world. It's like, I remember just today, in fact, when I was walking past HMV in town, this woman was coming out of HMV with, I think it was 2 elderly women, actually. And the woman said, "Oh, well, it'll be interesting to see if vinyl comes back." Because they'd obviously gone in and seen some vinyls. I was thinking, bloody hell, where have you been? I mean, that's been back for about a decade now, hasn't it?
Yeah, and that's the main way that HMV stays in business, by selling vinyl and T-shirts.
And I wonder, it's because, whenever something crops up, and dominates the landscape. In this case, it's things like Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, where you pick a song, you listen to a song, you make your own playlists that are all over the place, from different bands, different albums, different eras. If maybe that's just part of the kind of necessary counter-reaction to that, where you've now got young people growing up and thinking, well, I want to rebel against that, because there's always a rebellion instinct, and I think all of us, a healthy rebellion instinct, to say, well, no, I want to go back now. I want to explore. I want to buy Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon on vinyl, sit there, get stoned and listen to the whole thing without realising that they're just sort of part of that process. That's almost, that would be exactly what their dad did.
Yeah, there's a Pierre Bourdieu's idea of distinction, and that you demonstrate your social status, your social awareness, the social capital, cultural capital that you've got, symbolic capital, from the choices that you make. And being able to incorporate the past in a way like, people collect William Morris furniture or crafts or Art Nouveau stuff, is that you're showing that's your enculturation practice to demonstrate why you're different in the world. So it's nothing new. But I think what just to kind of think about is that the notion that culture is valuable and has values. I think that's the postmodern thing, which says there is no cultural value. There is no difference between the Mona Lisa and the lipstick that's being sold in the street. It's both. It's a commodity. It's a product that can just be bought and sold. It has the same kind of meaning, and a billboard with a picture of selling a product has the same value as a Matisse, or a Van Gogh or something like that. There is no and actually the metamodernism is about a return to cultural value, and to say that there is a distinction, but the distinction is drawn on the intent and the relationship that you have with the people who are co-participating, communing with that product thing.
To draw it back to something we were talking about earlier in the conversation, I feel like postmodernism was almost incredibly necessary to finally sort of scrub away the last little bits of Plato that existed in our sort of intellectual experience, because Plato put us in a position where he placed value and meaning out of reach in something metaphysical, in a realm beyond. And so it was almost necessary to say that when I look at postmodernism, I almost see it as an expression of, well, okay, if that's true, everything that you've just described is also true. And where does that leave us? Which is why, when the existentialists come about and the phenomenologists come about, that gives you a framework within which to understand that no, actually, there is a difference, and the difference lies in my experience of the thing. You go to the Louvre, you go and have a look at the Mona Lisa, and that experience you take away from it is necessarily more valuable than going up and having a look at, I don't know, the latest makeup brand's billboard or something. It's there. The difference lies within you.
The investment that you're prepared to put into it.
Exactly, yeah.
So whether you collect makeup products from across the generations and understand their aesthetic value, it's the cultural construction of meaning and the investment in meaning that kind of counts. Okay, it's amazing what 2 coffees will do.
I know, I'm buzzing.
Yeah. and I mean, it's not a bad format. Hopefully the music's not seeping in too much from the background, but we'll... So where do people get in contact with you?
I'm on Twitter under @Clayton Comics with an X instead of a C and an S.
Cool. And contact me via Twitter or Instagram @RobWMedia, and go to robwatsonmedia.net for a bit of background information. I'll put some links and some video playlists and stuff in place. But until next time, thanks very much. You've been listening to Distraction Therapy with me, Rob Watson. Find out more at robwatsonmedia.net or follow me on Instagram and Twitter @RobWMedia.